Hi guys, I hope you're doing really well. I'm very excited today to share with you a new technique that I learned that has changed the painting game for me. First of all, this is the new watercolor paper type and brand that I'm using. I really love it. And this is called gummed tape. And behind me on the table is a block of wood that I sanded down to make it really smooth. With these three things and some water, I'm going to be stretching my watercolor paper. Basically, I'll be soaking my paper and then taping it down with this water activated tape. And then as it dries, it's supposed to really flatten out. And then later on when I'm painting, no matter how much water I add, this should eliminate all the buckling of the paper. Now, if you are like me, you had not heard of this until now, or a few months ago. And this is what made me very skeptical. Surely I would have heard about this amazing technique that would stop all the buckling. The question that I get all the time, how do you stop your paper buckling? And I'm like, I tape it down as best I can, but you can't really stop the buckling. And if you're not like me and you had heard of this, why didn't you tell me about it earlier? So I figured either it was quite a trade secret and some artists didn't want to let other artists know about it, or I'm just really bad at finding out these things and I live under a rock, or it must not work that well. So before trying, I did a bunch of research and watched other artists do it, and then from all those videos I kind of took the pieces I want and got a general idea of how to do it myself. I would recommend going to watch someone else's video for a detailed explanation on how to do this. This is my first time doing it, but generally the idea is to just wet your paper, either like in a tub or like I'm doing with a sponge, and then have it kind of sitting on your wet board, and then wet your tape to activate it and stick all the edges down, smoothing out any bumps and letting it dry overnight before using it. Now here is the board with the paper the next day, and look at those smooth flat edges. Although obviously the true test is adding the water when I paint. First I'm drawing this little border for where the edge of my painting will be, and oh look, here's my whole sketch. Sorry, I find it really hard sometimes to do my initial sketch on camera because it just gets in the way and it pressures me. So this time I just had to do it off camera. But here's the mermaid scene we're going to be painting. Now I recorded a time lapse of this inking and painting process to get more of the gist of it and make it go faster. This video is more about how the paper reacts to it rather than the painting. Though I do really love this piece. You've likely already seen it on Instagram. I painted it as a big piece right at the end of Mermaid this year, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I was very inspired by old paintings of mermaids and underwater scenes with, I guess, a lot of detail, a lot going on, and this kind of romanticized idea of the mermaids all, sitting around very elegantly and trying on the jewelry and looking in the box. The supplies that I used should be linked down below. I am thinking of trying to buy a bit of a smaller nib because some of these thin, dainty lines were kind of hard to get. I find it easier to get thinner lines when I do quicker, swoopier brush strokes, I guess, with the pen. But it's kind of hard to do those quick, loose, free marks on like the areas that I need the dainty lines the most, like the face and the eyes and the lips, because they're all these really small, tight little areas, and a little bit to the left or the right, and it can really change how the whole face looks. So I try and do them quite slowly, which ends up making more ink come out. I guess I'm also not used to doing a painting with this many kind of small details, all really close together. But after I kind of got into it and got the hang of doing it, I'm really happy with it, and there weren't really any lines that I thought were terrible. This is actually, I think, the biggest watercolour illustration that I've really worked on, at least in this kind of new era of sharing my art and taking it more seriously. So I was a bit unsure of how to tackle this piece. I just thought one step at a time. So starting with the lines, I wanted everything, I guess, drawn in and grounded in the work, but I also didn't want to overcomplicate it, so I refrained from putting too many, scales on or shadows with my lines, because I can always add more lines later. I can't really take them away, so I wanted to decide those things more when I painted it. So before I start painting, I'm taking this liquid masking fluid and an old junky brush and just masking off that little edge border that I made at the start. And now, even though it takes so long and is quite tedious, I'm taking the masking fluid and masking off any of these foreground pieces like the mermaids and the fish and the seaweed that are directly in front of the background. What I want to do is paint the basic background in first with a big brush to get that kind of blocked in, and I don't really want to get any of these colours on any parts of the foreground because that will muddy it, and it can just be very tricky to keep a steady wash of a smooth background when having to go around all these little details. As always, the first thing I'm doing is blocking in all the base colours for everything in the painting, excluding anything that is supposed to stay white, like I think a bit of the shine from some of the treasures and on the edge of the mermaid tails I will keep white, but everything else has got to be a base colour. It's easier to go from there once everything has kind of been blocked in. Once the masking fluid's gone, I can, later on go in and put some more details or depth into the background. But for now, once I'm happy with the solid, larger washes of the background, I'm taking the masking fluid off of the mermaids and the fish and the seaweed, and here's what I'm left with. Now already, with all of the water I've added to the background and a little bit of the foreground, look at the paper, look at the edges and the lack of buckling. And I do say, I did not hold back at all with my water on this. I did add a lot of layers. The paper held up really well. Really happy with this paper. I love the hot pressed smooth finish. I feel like it takes the paint more evenly, and I honestly was just focused on the painting here. I'd forgotten that I was testing out this stretched watercolor paper technique, so it's a very good example of just my normal painting routine, and it's holding up really well so far. Now at this point right here, I had decided I was not happy with the top two mermaids' colours, specifically their hair, so I took it to Procreate and experimented with darker hair, and that's what I decided to do. So that's why all the hair is being coloured a lot darker right now. How beautiful is this music right now? Feels very mermaidy to me. I found it and it was like 26 minutes long or something, so I thought perfect to put in the background. Gives a very ethereal mermaid vibe, right? Here's some real time of how long it actually takes to paint. I think I did the whole piece in about 4 days, maybe 5 days to finish it off. Now I would like to mention 3 very minor problems I came upon when using this technique. The first is that I noticed right as I started painting a little bit of dust or fluff on the paper. I think this was because I let it dry out in the open after wetting it when I stretched my paper. Next time I think I'll cover it with something so that no particles from the air get on the paper. Number 2 is that you'll see later on when I finish, the back of the paper actually has a bit of discoloration. I think this might have been because my board was a little dirty before I started using it, so I'll see if this problem fixes itself in future. And the third, I guess not really problem, but it's not ideal, is that as far as I can tell, and I have researched, you can't take the tape off of the paper. So those edge parts of the paper that I taped down are kind of stuck there. Most people will either leave them on as they might be helpful when you're framing the artwork, or you can cut them off. It just reduces the size of your paper. So I'm not sure what I'll do in future. I'm thinking if I want to sell a painting, I might just try and tape off a smaller part of the edge of the paper so that I don't have to cut it down too much. So these are all pretty minor issues, but I just wanted you to be aware of them. It's not without its own, I guess, set of small problems, but I think the benefits certainly outweigh them because this worked so well, and you'll see later on how flat the paper ended up being. Here's a look at the palette I'm using, my new brilliant big watercolor palette, and here are the 3 brushes I used for the whole piece. Now I'm going to remove all the masking fluid from the edges, which is very satisfying to do, but does take a while. just look at the edges. I did not notice any buckling whatsoever. The smoothest, flattest tape line I've ever seen, and the smoothest, flattest paper. This worked so well. Here I am just touching up any last minute changes that I want to make, and now I'm cutting out just along the edge of the paper my painting. So there you have it. That was my first time stretching my watercolor paper, and I think it was very successful. I will be doing this for pretty much all of my larger pieces now. I had such a pleasant time painting it when I didn't have to worry about any warping or any tape peeling away. And I'm also really happy with how this painting turned out. I'm so proud of it, and I have prints available in my shop. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching this video, and I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.